Good afternoon, good morning, or depending on where you are in the world. We are live now with myself and Bhushan Sethi from PwC. Bhushan was guest on podcast number 50 of the Happier at Work podcast. I was absolutely thrilled to have him as a guest. We did record the podcast a few months ago, so things have kind of progressed a little bit since we had our discussion. But we're here today to share some of the insights from the podcast, to give you a little bit of a taster of what we spoke about and any additional developments that have happened since then. So Bhushan, would you like to introduce yourself to anyone who's watching today?
Absolutely. Good to see you again, Aoife. I co-lead PwC's People and Organisation practice. I work with lots of different clients across different industries on some of their workforce topics.
Brilliant. And we had a really, really interesting discussion, because I think for me, like, there's absolutely no question that since March 2020, like, the way that we work has changed forever. We're not going to go back to the way things were, I don't think, ever. Despite what some bosses, I think, are calling for and saying that they want to bring people back into the office full time. We had a great discussion about the kinds of events that have happened and what people can look out for. And what really resonated with me is this idea of the no regrets. So what can you do now that you won't regret investing in? So do you want to kind of kick off by sharing a few of the insights around that?
Sure. And what we discussed was, given all of the economic uncertainty, given different businesses are at different stages of reopening, those that have rely on human contact are obviously struggling in a much bigger way till we get a vaccine at scale. The idea that you can actually do a lot today around how you work and how you manage people. So we talked about table stakes being how you lead with empathy, how you lead with inclusion, how you address people's well-being, how you build in breaks and recovery, and then to the extent you can, it's relevant, how you help your people build new skills. They could be relevant to apply today if you're digitizing your business and engaging with customers in different channels, in different ways. They could be relevant tomorrow if people are being redeployed into other roles within your company or frankly outside of your company. And so whether it's reskilling, leadership, well-being, investments in technology that help your people and help your customers, they're some of the no regrets moves that companies can and are implementing last year and continuing to through 2021, we would see.
Yeah, I suppose a couple of points around that. So first of all, I have had feedback from people specifically on a couple of those points. So one of them being allowing leaders to show that level of vulnerability, because we're all going through this global pandemic. It might not be impacting us in the same way. We might not be dealing with it in the same way, but just talking about it, I think, really, really helps. And showing that level of vulnerability is really, really important. The other element is this idea of investing in the well-being of employees. And I know on the podcast you made reference specifically to, just making sure that people are taking breaks, making sure that they're using up their vacation days and things like that they're actually stepping away from work and taking time to rest and recover. So I wanted to share about that. And I suppose the challenge is that there are some people who are maybe still stuck in the old ways of thinking. So how can we, or what can we say to people who are still kind of thinking of coming back into the office, or thinking that wellness is just kind of this fluffy thing and you don't really want to, and they're really afraid maybe of being vulnerable and showing that level of vulnerability? Like, how can we overcome that?
Yeah, and I would take it from, there are so many great positive examples of leaders that have shown vulnerability, are engaging in dialogues with their teams, with external stakeholders. Let's look at those good cases and try and showcase them to whether they be to customers, to new employees, to new managers, because there's a lot of kind of good happening. You're absolutely right. There are a lot of naysayers. There are people who want to bury their head in the sand and think that diversity and inclusion is a 2020 fad and that it won't, but it's not going away. There are people that think that, well-being and designing around flexibility is just a temporary thing. Just like we have a lot of divisiveness outside the workplace on lots and lots of topics, we're always going to have that. But I would just encourage people to go where the positive energy is in their organization, the positive leaders, the positive HR teams, to say, how do we showcase more and more of those leaders, emerging leaders, new hires who are doing good things around well-being and productivity and learning, and showcase them.
Yeah, I really, really like that approach. And it's like giving people the option to vote with their feet, essentially. So if you're not displaying those levels of vulnerability, if you're not providing breaks, or if you're not making sure that people are looked after well, then people are going to leave those teams if they know that there's something better out there.
Yeah. And Aoife, like, we recorded at the start of the middle of November. I mean, what's happened since we recorded? There's been an insurrection, there's been a transfer of power, there've been rage against the financial markets, there's rage against English footballers, kind of, racist abuse. So there's a lot of anger and divisiveness out in the world today, and that means that there is in the workplace. What we need to make sure is that leaders, employees, counterparties are actually just engaging in dialogue. How are you doing? Let's have a discussion. We can be tolerant of each other's opinions on many, many topics that are impacting the employee psyche. I think it's really important right now, given many parts of the world are still in lockdown or semi-lockdown, just to engage in these dialogues. And yes, there's rage and there's hatred and there's disagreements, but I think it's important to find the positivity. And what we're seeing is, as we talked about, businesses have a massive role in the societal topics that I just described. And many of them are actually trying to lead the way on discussions about systemic racism and inclusion, and how do we get people back to work safely, and what do we do around the vaccine, how do we make sure that we manage any fear, anxiety, disinformation as well around things like vaccines.
Yeah, and that is, that's another thing that really came through from the podcast, is this idea of just talking about it. What is the first step towards making change? It's actually having a conversation about it and not shying away from having those conversations as well. And the one that we referenced in particular was this systemic racism, and a lot of people, I think, they think it's, that's an America problem, but it's not. It happens everywhere. And it's about making people more aware of it and starting to talk about those kind of issues that are happening everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Black History Month here in the US. I mean, the fact that we need a month to talk about these topics is a little crazy and sad at the same time. But the more that we can just keep kind of pushing the agendas around inclusion, demonstrating it through public policy, through what employers can do for their people, and just calling out, we talked about bystanders, calling out bad behavior, whether it's in your friendship circle, in your family, in your virtual workplace, in your physical workplace. If we're not calling out casual, systemic, or explicit racism or any kind of prejudice, and again, I reference English football because what people may have missed is, now with all the anger that's happening on social media, English footballers who are Black are getting targeted, and it's just an example of the rage and the anger. Again, having zero tolerance around any of that is so important as we kind of get through to the other side. Hopefully in the fall, we'll have people back in more offices. We'll have people traveling and consuming, and you'll maybe back in New York for a glass of wine. I think that's really important, so we can go about our consumer lives as well.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly that. So if you see something, say something. It's not about, I just noticed it's sunset time here. It's starting to get dark. I probably should have put on a light before I came on, but it is what it is. But yeah, if you see something, say something. And if there's something that you don't agree with, then do speak up. It's not just about observing or saying that you support movements when actually you're not doing anything, you're not taking any action to support that. I know there were some stats that you wanted to share around temperature checks and vaccinations and things like that. If you want to kind of talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, maybe just some, because we released some fresh data in our January workforce pulse survey, where we polled over 1,000 US workers across essential businesses and office workers who are mainly remote. And we really probed the question around how people come back to work where they need to, and what role do vaccines play in reopening the US economy. As you can imagine, there is a very divided kind of population on this. 54% felt comfortable, were very willing to share proof of vaccination with their employer. Only 35% were comfortable with track and trace, so contact tracing kind of in the workplace of safety. So whether it's around taking the vaccine, showing proof of the vaccine, signing up to contact tracing, sharing things like travel history, we're seeing a lot of resistance around this topic. Said the other way, there's a massive opportunity for companies to highlight the safety measures they're putting in place for where essential workers need to be back and need to engage safely. And to the extent that people do come back 2 to 3 days a week in a hybrid way in other businesses through the course of this calendar year, there are safety measures in place. So I thought that was interesting, not really surprising. The other thing, Aoife, in that survey, it highlighted that everything that we talked about in our June survey around the goodness that firms have done around leading with empathy, investing in new ways of working, making sure people could work remote with different tools, all of that has normalized. It's flatlined, it hasn't improved. So what we're seeing in the January timeframe, so what we're seeing is firms have to continue to do more than just demonstrate good leadership, tapping into well-being. They've got, and giving the right tools for people to work remotely. They've got to address other things that we talked about earlier in this call, other things that are going on with people, whether they're worried about the vaccine, their health outcomes, their job security, what's going on in our political situation, what's going on in their city or state. I mean, there's so much that businesses have a responsibility, and leaders and managers and colleagues have a responsibility in just creating a dialogue that's partly about work, but it's about other topics.
Yeah. It's about the things that impact on work. Exactly that. So some interesting stats around that, and really great if people just start having those conversations about what else can we do to make you feel a bit safer at work, or to make work more enjoyable, or I suppose it's going back to the vaccinations, maybe it's a privacy thing that people don't feel like they want to give up that level of detail to their employer. But I mean, globally and societally, how are we going to be able to manage that then as well?
Yeah, privacy is a big concern. There's obviously distrust. When we looked at stats, there was less trust and willingness on the side of some of the Black population. So kind of that's understandable in terms of the historic kind of mistrust around health and administration for the Black community. There was some parts of the US where there was less trust in the Midwest states. There was less trust than say the East Coast. So yeah, I mean, looking at the demographics, looking at the data set, and having targeted responses is what companies and governments are going to have to do around getting us to, whether it's 70, 80 or 90% kind of vaccine and herd immunity, which we're all hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I suppose, my area of interest is all around this, the data, and using data to figure out, is it by demographic, by, what is it that we actually need to do to create this better environment, this better work environment. A quick shout out to Rachel Gatto, who has said that connection and communication are really key for driving these types of initiatives. So she's just commented on LinkedIn. Thank you for that, Rachel. Is there anything else that you'd like to say in relation to what we spoke about on the podcast, or why should people tune in? I'm pretty sure I put the link to the full-length episode of the podcast below this. You should see it there. If it's not, then I will do it after this. But anything else that you'd like to share?
I would say that this whole topic around the future of work is not a new topic. It's a very daunting topic when people think about it. I think what we tried to do is break it down into bite sizes. We talked about, how do you measure productivity? What does it actually mean? How do you sustain it? We talked about leadership and well-being. We talked about the need for reskilling, and we picked a topic around systemic racism, and just shared some insights. And I think the more people can just in these times just share openly, freely, learn from anywhere, steal ideas from anyone, and apply them to their companies, to their business, to their function. Even if you're coming into the workplace, or you're a tenured HR professional or a C-suite leader really looking to kind of up your firm's game on the people agenda. I think it's using lots of these different ideas and coming up with a here and now, and then a medium to longer term plan for your own company.
Yeah. Yeah. And seeing exactly what will work. And definitely the podcast, I think, will give at least some ideas for people to think about of what they can be doing straight away.
Absolutely. We'll probably have to record another one in 6 to 12 months time, because
Yes,
this
great.
changes very quickly.
Yeah. No, that sounds brilliant. And we can refer back to the one that we recorded already. Thank you so much for your time today, Bhushan, and for on the podcast as well. Really enjoyed the conversation. I think it's really crucial at the moment that we have these kinds of conversations. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.